What if you wanted to make your own adaptive card with your own rules and regulations? So I'm going to show you how you can do that without code. Okay, so what I'm using is a sample form. And by the way, these sample examples of adaptive cards I wrote for Power Automate several years ago, but they still work in Copilot Studio or anything else. But just for the sake of this short demo, we're going to rebuild this form on the left side of the screen. It's a lead notification form collecting the person's first name, last name, email, phone number, and which product they're interested in. I think it's a good introduction to how you can drag and drop your way through adaptive cards. So you're going to start on the site adaptivecards.io, and just FYI, in Copilot Studio, when you add an adaptive card, the code being directly underneath where we were in the last chapter, above that is Open Adaptive Card Designer, which will open this site for you. Okay, so but you can use your student assets as well to find adaptivecards.io. When you're there, click on Samples, and you'll see a ton of adaptive card samples here that you can reuse. Some are more complex than others. I'm going to start with the form, and the reason is because it's very close to what I'm looking for. So sometimes when you're looking through the samples, see if one of them's close to where you want to go, and then you can leverage that as your starting point. So I'm going to leverage the sample input form for this exercise, and we're going to rebuild this with that sample. I have turned off adaptive card templating because we don't need it in this particular exercise. And then after I've turned that off, I'm going to click Try It Yourself. And then I've closed all the code panels on the bottom. So just to show you this, on the bottom of the screen, there's usually the payload and the editor. You don't need any of that. Just close it for now. And then we're going to focus on the form. So the first thing is mine says lead notification. So we'll just click on the first header and just replace that. Notice there's a text property in the element that you can just change this to lead notification. And then the text here looks like the sample text, and this is also a text property. These are both, this is text and rich text fields. So I'll explain that in a second. So please fill out a single, I probably could have, no, I couldn't copy and paste because that is just a screenshot. Each individual expressing interest in our products. So now we have the top of the form. Doesn't look like we need another paragraph, so we'll just notice that when you select something, you get the ability to move it around, dragging it around the screen, and you get the ability to delete it. And we're going to delete that second paragraph because we don't need it. Right now, what I want you to understand is that all of these elements on this screen came from the card elements on the left side. They were literal drag and drops. Okay, so this one, if you look at, I'm going to make the screen bigger just for a minute so you can, well, I'll close this and open up card structure. You can see that it's a text block. Okay, this one is also a text block. You have the ability, if you want to use a rich text block when you want more formatting. But for the most part, with text, I would suggest you keep it simple and use a text block for Copilot Studio. And then you have input text elements, and they were just this being dragged to the screen. Okay, input text. All right, I'm going to delete that. And then everything that has to do with input starts with the word input. And when you see an input, recognize that that's where your end user can now type. Okay, everything else is for display purposes only. All right, so I'm going to go back to my properties here, closing my card structure. I just wanted you to see that these all have names, and by clicking on them in the card structure, you can see what their names are. And basically, you can drag new ones onto the card just by dragging from here on to the screen. So looking over on the left, we will need an email. And so I'm going to keep this one, and I'm going to show you why. If I click on this input field, you'll notice on the right side in the properties, there's something really cool that you're going to want in Copilot Studio. And that's the ability to validate an email address. So it used a regex pattern to validate. And instead of you having to learn this, although you can use it in Copilot Studio with entities as well, we're going to hold off on teaching you that now and just let you reuse that. Don't delete this. Keep it. All right. The only difference is this says corporate email, and it is not required here, but I make it required here, because how are we going to contact our lead if we don't have an email at the very least? All right. So I'm going to change your email, and that's up in here in the label. So the label represents what's sitting in front of the field. Okay, so I'm just going to change this from your email to corporate email. Okay, and then your name, because they had a first and last, I'm going to actually change that to, and I'm not going to put potential customer. I'm just going to put first name. And then I want last name. So I want you to recognize that with both of these, there is an ID. Do you see that? My email ID, and this one is my name ID. When you submit these forms in Copilot Studio, those are the things you will get back, because it refers to these IDs. Okay, so it basically says, what did they submit on ID my name, and whatever they typed here will go in there, and that's what you'll get in your variable for my name. Okay, and we'll see that in a few minutes. So let's make a last name field, right? So, and I can make this, I think I'm going to make this my last name field, and I'm just going to call it my last name. So the ID is important, and it must be unique. It represents what Copilot Studio is going to look at to know what are you asking about, or what did they type where. Okay, so I'm going to drag another input text field in front of last name, and that's a brand new one, but I know all the pieces, so it's not a problem. So this is where I'm going to have first name. Maybe first name isn't required, right? But if I wanted to make it required, I would click here. And then placeholder text is into your first name. You don't need to have placeholder text, but it can help. If I want it here, I could put into your last name, and it's basically what they'll see, but that's not a value. So it's what they type that's going to be the value there. Okay, same thing here. I can put placeholder text into your corporate email. Okay, so now that I have that all ready, do I have a phone number? Yep, I'm going to change that to business phone number. And I might leave that little tip there. It put in parentheses the format of the number that we want. And I don't need a placeholder for that. I think that's pretty straightforward. But if you wanted to take that out of the label and put that as a placeholder, you most definitely could. See how we have ideas while we're working here. And that's fine. And then finally, there's a choice list here, basically indicating which product. And so if you go to the input, anytime you want an input from the customer, start with inputs. And I'm just going to pull up here in front of the submit button the choice set. And then you'll notice I need to give it an ID. So I'm just going to call this ID choice product. Okay, I'll say ID product. I'll say product choice. That's simple enough, right? Sometimes what I'll do is, since I used my on the other toe, I'll prefix them all the same way. This will make it easy in the variables in Copilot Studio to get there faster, because they'll all be grouped together because they have the same prefix. So since it said my first name, we didn't put one there, my first name, then this one is my last name, and they have no spaces in these IDs. My last name, my email, right? Say my email. And then the last one here, my tel. And then so I made this my product choice. So what I've done also in the past is use, instead of my, you could use AC in lowercase, which stands for adaptive card. And it just helps you get to that set of variables when you need to reuse them later in Copilot Studio. All right, good tip for Copilot Studio. Now the placeholder text I'm going to use here is select one, so that they realize they have to drop this down. And then the choices are down here. choice 1, 2, 3. Now I could put Office 365 on both sides. I'm actually going to put the words right on the right so you can see what happens here. Dynamics 365, Dynamics 365. I'm just making them slightly different. That's all I'm doing. I can add as many new choices as I want. Be careful not to make too many because then it becomes kind of difficult for the end user to navigate. Under 10 is best for this. And I'm just putting the word right on the right side, and you'll see instantly why I'm doing that in a second. Okay, give me a minute. All right, so now they're all added. Okay, so basically I'm done with my form because it already had a submit button. But if you wanted to add a submit button, you would add the action set. When you add an action set, you're given a choice of open URL button, which you might use on your display cards, a submit button like in this one, a show card in case you want to hide a card and display it, and toggle visibility. So these two on the top are the two you'll want to use the most with Copilot Studio. Either you're letting them open a URL, maybe it's a file they're opening or a SharePoint list item it's opening, or you want to submit what they have typed in the form. In that case, we would use action submit, and then just whatever you want the button to say, put in the title property, okay? And if we delete this extra one that I added and then click on this, you'll see that's the case here. And it has a default style, it's a primary button, and you can actually make it red if you do destructive and things like that, but we're gonna use default for the most cases in Copilot Studio, we'll use default. The picture's not even necessary, so why don't we just delete it? If we delete it, we're going to have a very thin column. So there is also a column container. So containers are things you put things into. And there were two columns in this card structure so that one side, you see there's a column set of two. One side is the form and the other side is the image. That's why we did that. So I can remove that and have only be one column just by getting rid of that column set, and boom, we're done. Okay, so now we've created the whole lead form. We can test what it will look like. So if you go up to the top, you can get the hosts that show this card, and you could say, what will this look like in Teams? And we'll actually display it for you how it looks in Teams. Now I'm going to put it in preview mode so that I can preview how this will work. And you'll notice that none of these say right. Okay, remember I put left side just the product, right side I put product and right. That's because that right side, I'm just going to turn off preview mode, can be whatever you want it to be as a return value. So in other words, when you're in preview mode, what you see here is what's on the left side of those choices. But what you return back when you hit submit is what's on the right side of those choices, which gives you a little bit of flexibility. And I can check any host this way. So let's check Outlook, okay? And this is the way it would look different in Outlook. So that's the beauty of adaptive cards. They adapt to their host. You don't have to worry about fixing it so it adapts. It automatically adapts. All right, so I'm going to turn off preview mode, and everybody works in bot framework usually, all right? All right, so are we ready to copy the code over? Oops, I think I deleted my submit by accident. So let's get that action set back again. And then once it's there, you'll click add an action, choose submit. And then I want it to say submit. Simple as that. Okay, so we have our submit button back. I think there's one more thing we need to do there. And when you open up your element properties for the submit button, you already changed it to submit, but I forgot one thing here. On data, you want to type exactly what I have put here into the data slot. What this does is it tells it when you submit, I want you to submit the ID. Remember we set all those IDs, right? I want you to submit the value of the ID. And so you just do an open curly, ID in quotes, colon, and then submit form in quotes and close the curly. All right. This will mean that your form will be submit with the values of the ID, and there'll be no need for you to touch code. All right. This is the closest thing you will get to code. So just try to remember this one little patch of information. It's only for submit buttons, and it's because we have IDs on all those input fields. All right. So now we got that done. I want to check one thing. I had last name required because I had reused the email, I think. So I want to look at that again. Enter your last name. If you make it required, you have to have an error message for it. I'll just put, we need your last name. Okay, whatever way you want to do that. All right, that is now the error message if they don't put something in here. Okay, whereas on the email we had the regedit, so it has to have a valid email address format, and that's the regedit for that. Okay, regex for that. All right, so now that that's done, trying to think, is there anything else? We did that. I don't think this is required, so we're okay. We did the left and the right on this, and I want you to see that this submits differently, so I'm going to leave it with all of them saying right. But remember, this is the value that's submit, but this is the value it's displayed, which means you can do two different things. For instance, if you're going to submit to Dataverse, you might submit the display name for an option set here, but the option set number on this side. Okay, that's a huge tip. I really hoped you watched the whole video because that's a huge tip. Okay, all right, so now I'm going to close that, and I'm going to use my favorite button in adaptivecards.io, which again helps me not have to touch code. Now it does say that I'm in the wrong version here because the old version for this is 1.3. So technically this would be the only reason I would open the code editor, is to change 1.3 to 1.5. And I'll do that. So I'll just click the card payload editor and change that to 1.5. It's not a big deal. You could do it later in Copilot Studio. All right. And then I'm going to copy the card payload. This is really important because this doesn't save anywhere. Like, you can't save with your work. So by copying the card payload, you get to save this and use it in Copilot Studio. And then you go back to Copilot Studio, and let's just put it in the conversation start. So go to topics, and then go to system, and then go to conversation start, and let's just add another node there. This is really important. Listen up. But in this case, we need to ask with an adaptive card because we are asking them to submit data on it. So it's very important to use ask with adaptive cards for all form-like scenarios. When you click here, you can now see your old code, you replace that with your new code, and you save. You'll get a temporary error in the topics, just ignore it because as soon as it finishes saving, everything will be fine. That is because we used ask with an adaptive card, all of our ID values come out as variables right away for us. Nothing for us to do extra. Those variables will automatically pop out with all the things that they fill in. Okay, so let's give it a test. I'm going to open my test panel and refresh. And that will give me the blank form because we put it in the conversation start. And now let's fill it out. I'm going to put my name. I'm going to skip last name. I'm going to put a weird email. And then I'm going to put my phone number. And I'm going to pick Dynamics 365. Okay, then I'm going to hit submit. Our error checking kicks in. Aren't we excited about that? Error validation or validation is possible with these forms, right? So it's telling me I need a last name here. Now, that's not a valid email address. I really love that. It's checking that they put a valid email address. And now I'm going to submit it again. And I think I did put their last name. I hope there's not a, there might be a little bit of a, okay, let's go look and see what adaptive cards did in that field. Last name. Let's look at it. We can troubleshoot it over here. Ah, nope. Yes, last name, we made a mistake and left that reg edit in there. Take that out. We don't need that. No pattern. No pattern. Copy card payload. Let's go back and replace this, and that will solve that problem. Now, of course, I could have edited the code in Copilot Studio, but since we had Adaptive Card I/O open already, I decided to just do it here. I'm just going to replace that, and if I scroll back up, and I can open this up big so I can see, your last name should not, it's sticking, okay? So that might be a problem with adaptivecards.io. This is sticking. So I will just delete it. Okay, so then maybe this is the one exception where you might need code. Whenever there's a problem, something is sticking that shouldn't stick, you can take it out. I can even change is required to false here if I don't want to make the last name required. But those little tweaks in code are so easy compared to the drag and drop that we did to build the card. All right, so then we're going to refresh over here again. And we're going to just put we'll just go ahead and put all the names in here, but I don't think that one will error out anymore because it's not required, right? But I'll put it in there. And then Gordon@Gmail. Okay, I didn't put the .com. And I'm going to pick Dynamics again and submit. We'll get an error there because that's not a valid email address. We love that. We really love that kind of help. And then we're submit. Now there's no errors. If we go to the variables for this topic and we open that up, you'll see that we got all the things that I typed, but notice for the product choice, we got Dynamics 365 right, because what's on the right side is what is submit. What's on the left side is only what the user sees. So there was a lot of tips in that chapter. For those of you hoping to master adaptive cards, this is a cool thing to know.